this 8th Fest Forum already. So nice that you're all here again. Today we will talk about gender and a lot around that. Sorry if I say it maybe too quickly now, but I will soon give the floor to Mattia, who will explain everything. He prepared this, well, everything. Yeah, I think everything. He prepared this meeting with Reinhild, with Annika, with Gaia, and with many people. I'm very curious about that.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. I have a little bit of a reverb. Welcome to this evening when we will talk about gender identity, sexual identity, and representation in storytelling. For a first base of what we are going to talk about, I like for all of us to consider that in the last few decades, the world has changed. The way we perceive the world has changed related to gender and sexual identity. Feminism changed the way we looked at gender roles, and sexuality had bloomed, and now we recognize much more identity than 1 century ago. And of course, all of this changes our perspective on our world, and it creates a little bit of what I like to call a conundrum in storytelling. Because us as storytellers deal with traditional stories. And what happens now that we have to bring these traditional stories to a modern audience and look at them through this new set of spectacles that we developed through the years. So this is what we are going to talk for this evening. And with me, I'd like to present you the guests, the speakers for this evening. We have Ragnhild Mork, who is member of the executive committee of FEST. She's also part of Strand 3 of the FEST European project, and also teacher at the University. My audio was deactivated. Then we have also Annika Fieser. Annika is a young storyteller. She's from Berlin. She already worked with gender roles and female representation in storytelling and theaters. This is for now. She will receive a much deeper presentation later. And last but not least, this evening we will have the presence of Gaia Di Pierro, who, for those who can read the surname, yes, we are relatives, but more importantly, Gaia is an activist in LGBTQI rights, and she also works in a shelter for victims of gender-based violence. So, welcome everyone. And I'd like to leave the word to Gaia, who will show us in some kind of way, in what kind of way our perspective nowadays on gender identity and sexuality has changed. So please, Gaia, take the floor and
Okay, good evening, everyone. And thank you for asking me to join this meeting. It will be challenging. And first of all, I guess I should excuse my English because I haven't been practicing for a while, so probably it will not be so perfect, but I will try. Okay, first of all, when we speak about sexual identity, we are talking about something not so difficult, but not so easy. It's composed by four actually components. It's not just one thing, and I'm going to explain, I guess, I hope, sharing my screen. Okay, so sexual identity, I was saying. Just start from these reflections. As you know, I guess, we are constantly taught in our life that we are men or women. And I'm sorry, but our culture is full of this. Men have penis and women have vagina. And so men love women and women love men. And as I wrote there, this is how it should be in this majority representation of our society. But is it always like that? As you can, I hope, read, this is my opinion, but of course it's not just my opinion. Luckily, the human race is more interesting than this. We all have, and you are storytellers, so I hope you understand what I'm saying. We all have and are our personal story, and the fact that some of us doesn't fit in that majority does not make anyone or any story less valid. When I say valid, I say that we all should feel like our existence is valid, even if someone else doesn't recognize it. So let me present the gender-bred person. As you can see, the component I was previously talking about are four. And first of all, we have sex. When we say sex, it's not just anatomical sex, even if in the image you can see written anatomical sex, because it's not just what our genitalia are, but also hormones and chromosomes. And this set of characteristics are what we define as sex, biological sex, anatomical sex. And we are taught, again, that we are female and male, but it's not always like that, because we have intersex people who have not this anatomical or genetics characteristics so well defined as female or male. And these people are up to 2% of world population. And also I can say that these people are often, almost always, forced to have surgery.
It's very niche that people get in the 2% possibility to be intersex. So it doesn't really happen so much. They have to be forced and change sex, but it's still a huge problem related to what their identity is, because they are forced from outside. It's not their own choice, usually.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So then we have gender identity, and this is the answer to the question, which gender I feel I belong to, or how do I identify myself in a gender spectrum? I should be more precise in this, because we usually think that we have a binary, and on one side we have femininity, and on another side we have masculinity. We have women and men, but it's not always like that, because gender may be perceived as social construct, and so we can also think that gender doesn't exist, and or that we have more than two genders, or more than three, or more genders, or no genders. I don't know if I am clear, but I hope we will have time to answer some questions later. But coming back to gender identity, if my sex is male and I identify as a man, or my sex is female and I identify as a woman, then I am cisgender. Otherwise, I can call myself a transgender person. And then you can read some words like non-binary or genderless or gender fluid, but still, I hope we can discuss it later. Of course, you can stop me if I'm not so clear.
I don't see questions in chat related to that yet, so you can go on. You can go on.
Okay.
Also, anyway, if anyone has question, please put in the chat. We will answer them in due time.
Okay. I'm not able to see the chat right now because I'm sharing the. Okay. Okay. So this is actually what I was saying earlier, but it is about a gender expression. We can see someone walking with high heels, and we will assume that that person would have a feminine gender expression. So, like a lot of behaviors that we think that are feminine or masculine. This gender expression is not related to gender identity. It's not related to biological sex, and it's not actually related to any of these components for all the people. For the majority of the people, it has a relation. There is a relation between all these components, but there are also people that they don't have this kind of a relation. Okay. So the last component is attraction, also known as sexual or romantic orientation. Of course, here the question is, who am I attracted to in a sexual romantic way? Okay, as you can read, my answer to this question is a little bit, I don't know, polemic, because I hope one day we won't need to identify ourselves about our attraction, our gender identity, and so on. But now we need to do it and our identity, our sexual identity, is also defined from our attraction. So we all know that there are straight people who are people attracted to the opposite gender. We know that there are homosexual people who are the ones attracted to the same gender, but we also have bisexual people or pansexual people. We have asexual people, aromantic. I know I'm saying a lot of words, but I would like to have a interactive conversation about this, because I don't know if someone is more I don't know, skilled in this world or not. So probably the best thing would be asking for explanation on specific words. And these are just some suggestions, actually. You can read, because there are a lot of stereotypes about LGBTQIA people, and these four are maybe some of the ones that I personally hate more. Because a lot of people think that these components are related to each other, and it's not. So because, you know, when you see someone, when you see maybe a transgender woman, in our imagination, this woman would be attracted to men, but it's not always like that. A lot of people confuse gender identity with sexual orientation, and they are not related strictly. Or still, some people think that transgender people should be in a medical treatment, but it's not always like that. Or I don't know. We have a lot of examples like that. We see someone that who has masculine behavior, and we assume that he's gay, but it's not like that, not always. So these are my inputs, and I hope that if you have some question, I'm here to answer. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question, and there is, thank you Gaia for the input. We have a question, and there is already some discussion about it in chat from Justin, who says, how do the non-gender people want to be called?
Okay, so the answer here is every person has their own preferences. So the best thing to do is probably ask directly every person, and I can say I am comfortable with using, I don't know, male pronouns, or you know, it's also about the language, because in Italian, for example, we don't have gender neutral words, and so we need to choose female or male pronouns, and we have just these two possibilities. So it depends on every language, but the best thing to do is to ask to people directly. Did I answer?
Yes, I think so. They thank you. They thank you. So now, if there are no other question on this topic specifically, and I don't see any, we would like to move on this. And now that we had a grasp on how colorful this spectrum is, and how many differences can be amongst people, it's time to make an experiment. We would like to we would like you to do a little exercise with our questionnaire. Katy, could you please share the link for the questionnaire in chat? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Katy. As you can see, in chat just appeared the link to download the questionnaire. I'd like for all of you who can to download it and open so that you have it on your screen in the next part of this session, please. This is what we call the just a second. The privilege and disadvantage questionnaire. It is a series of questions, true or false. We would like you to answer that will give you some kind of grasp of where you are in the world right now. Are you in a position of privilege? Are you in a position of disadvantage? There are some specific questions. They can surprise you. Sometimes we realize it's not, we are not as advantaged as we thought, or we are more advantaged than we thought. Sometimes we discover there are people who have disadvantage we never thought existed. So this is just a little exercise for all of you to challenge yourself and what you knew about yourself and the place you have you hold in our society. Were you able to download the questionnaire? Have a look at it for 5 minutes, and then we will like to divide you in break rooms so that you can give each other feedbacks about what you discovered. So let's have 5 minutes for it now, and then we will split. And I think we could move on the next step. Don't worry if you weren't able to finish the whole questionnaire. I repeat, keep it and try to fill it again eventually later. What I'd like you now to do is we will split you in breakout rooms, and you will find yourself in small groups. And now I'd like you to share a feedback about what did you find out from this question. Is your position as you expected it at the beginning? Something changed? Was something unexpected? Something did surprise you about your position in the world? and listen also to the other, and maybe you could be also surprised of what the other people position in the world is respect to yours. So Aryan, could you split the room? Little by little we are coming back in the big room. So are we all back?
Yes.
Yes.
How did it go? Was someone very surprised? I heard some some kind of comments of people just getting back here. Is there someone who would like to share some revelation that happened in those breakout room? There's someone?
I'll share.
Yes.
So we had a bit of a technical thing going on. So in our breakout room, somehow we could hear a discussion from another breakout room, but we couldn't see their faces.
Whoa, creepy. Ooh.
Right?
What were they talking about? No, you
They were
can't.
talking about Jung and archetypes, of course. And then, and it was incredible. So we couldn't really hear the details, but we heard a lot of words: Jung, archetype, masculinity, femininity. And in the middle of it, we were saying, sorry, where are you? Where are you based? Are you in America? Are you in Europe? Are you in Scotland? And after a while of hearing other people's conversations, other people's opinions about gender and sexuality, somebody in our group tried to explain a very personal story about a close family member and their journey with their own identity. But in it all, trying to communicate that through this forum of like voices speaking, and it felt completely appropriate, very confusing and very beautiful. So sometimes these technological glitches can bring some beautiful like art. I was really touched. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else would like to share? We knew that there was a problem with the ghost in the machine, and we realized eventually we didn't know what happened, but
Well, Mattia, the thing was, I was in that breakout room, and what I wanted to tell was that before I got pregnant from my second son, I saw a ghost. Really, I saw the spirit of my son standing beside my bed. And it was like not female, not male. It was a neutral kind of spirit. I was very awake. And I knew that when I would have this child, he would be searching. And he is still searching who he is and what he is. And it's beautiful. So what I missed in the presentation and in the questionnaire is that there's also a soul who has traveled through different lives, being male, being female, being a mixture. And that is what I am experiencing right now in my life with my son. So the ghost was also in the breakout room for some reason. It was very strange.
it was nice. So I think it's time to move over. There's Annika who I think wanted to add something about the matter of privilege and disadvantage. So Annika, please take.
Yes, just one note on which I've done these kind of questionnaires a couple of times, and I often stumble about this idea of there's the privileged and there's the disadvantaged. I think the idea is clear to get aware of like where some of us have maybe the privilege of not having to be concerned with things, and for other people it's a reality. But for me, it's super important to also stress that if we tick the boxes of like, actually, yeah, I'm disadvantaged, it's also a position of some kind of power, because on the one hand, for me, it's a bit like a broader, it comes with a broader understanding of how the world works. For example, just to explain what I'm getting at is, I have a lot of like male friends that are often very shocked when this whole Me Too debate came about and people were talking about like sexual harassment on a day-to-day basis, and all my female friends were like, no, yeah, of course, that's the world, that's reality, you know. So there was a broader spectrum of broad understanding of how the world looks like. And also it comes with strategies of resistance. So it actually is also like a very powerful place of knowing how to deal with these kind of power hierarchies. Yeah, that was just very like from a personal note, like important, because I feel it's otherwise weird because it victimizes some people. Yeah.
Thank you, Annika. And I looked in the chat. There was Claire Murphy who said in the breakout room, they talked about the question, where are the LGBTQIA stories, and how traditional stories represent the spectrum, the modern spectrum. And I think there's a wonderful discussion, because it links us to the next part of our evening, regarding representation, about traditional stories. How do they represent? How do they challenge the gender norms and the non-binary world? And I think, Ragnhild, you made a nice experiment about that. So could you offer us your insight about the matter?
I will do. And for that, I will share my screen. I've done for this evening a little personal research. And this is also, I can also already note that in the chat, there's lots going on. And I thought it would be good to have the reality of what we are dealing with. So this is, as I said, a personal mini research, and it is based on, well, many of you know the ATU system. It's the Arne Thompson-Utah Index. It's the classification of folktales, which provide us with a catalogue of folktale types divided by numbers. Each number stands for one tale type, and the catalogue amounts to over 2,400 different types. And don't be worried, I did not go through 2,400 tale types. I looked at a book that we recommend our students to use to search for stories, and that is this one, a small tale type catalogue of European wonder tales and novelistic tales. We put it on there to make searching for stories easier. It looks like this. If you see my screen, it's this tiny little book. And in this book, the author has gathered 189 tale types, 147 wonder tales, and 41 novelistic tales. And it looks like this inside. Sorry, this is in German, but you get the gist of it. It's about, oops, what happened? Technical issues. It's, say, picked out 451, The Girl Who Looks for Her Brothers. You all know the tale. The 7 ravens, the 12 brothers, the 6 swans, or the 12 wild ducks. And I've gone through this overview and looked for certain criteria, because I was looking for the gender-bred person qualities. What can I find in this, which is the tail type, which gives me an idea of what stories are out there. And this is what happened. I divided it into the gender-bred topics: gender expression, attraction, gender identity, and sex. In gender expression, I found LGBTQI topics like cross-dressing that was named. There were 7 stories. That amounts to 4% of all of the bulk in the book. And gender conform, sorry?
Ragnar, sorry if I interrupt you, but the screen didn't change. Maybe it's just me, but I still see the first presentation.
I will do something else. 2 seconds. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Not totally.
I see the
empty Word file.
You see a table.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Superb. So
Perfect. Okay.
these are the ones. These are the topics from the gender-bred person. And I started with the gender expression, and the only really named gender expression when it comes to LGBTQI topics is cross-dressing, and it's all from female to male. And so in these tail types, these numbers, I could find cross-dressing. And in all other 189, so 100% of them, I find gender conform indications or traits. When I went to attraction, this is what I found. On the gay motive, there's a princess who marries a princess, but she's marrying the princess because the other one doesn't know she is a woman. It's a story which goes under the tail type of sex change. And that's sort of one story. And wedding as a heteronormative motive, well, you are probably not surprised that appears in many of the stories. In fact, I've subdivided this because I was interested in the fact that in this, wedding is a topic. And here, in these stories, the only function the wife has is to be the price of the main character. So she doesn't appear at all except for the wedding. And so 34% of all these stories in here have a wife who has no say in what's going on or who has no place in the story at all. And there are 6 stories where there are men who are the price and which otherwise don't have a place in the story at all. And then I went into gender identity and sex. Right, and you will not be surprised what happens first. I found 2 stories, one story with a trans motive and one story with the intersex motive. The trans motive is the same as we had here, the gay motive. The woman turns into a man at the end. And I might add at this point that the tail type sex change, if it's a sex change between a woman to a man, she will always stay a man at the end. It's her sort of winning bid. If it's a man, he will change into a woman and then he will change back into man because being a woman is a punishment. The intersex motive relates to a tale where a man eats a fish and he gives birth to a child. And then I went into cisgender. Remember, that's the one who identifies as man and is born man. So it's a male sex and male gender identity, at least what it looks like on the surface. That looks like this. So I've subdivided the tales looking for the positive lead, so the main character in the story. And I've looked at the character who is going from poor to rich, from lack of knowledge to knowledgeable, from unfortunate to fortunate, and who has an active role in the story, who's a lead person and who drives his own fate forwards. 70% of the stories in the book, they're all male leads, and then the positive male character. A negative male lead would be someone who, like Bluebeard, someone who goes from bad to worse, who's punished and who kind of gets the punishment in the end. The positive lead, as for a woman, amounts to 24% of the stories. So there's quite a big difference between the man lead and the woman lead, in the sense of who is active and who is driving their fate forward, which sort of resembles, if we go over to The Wife as a Prize, there's even more Wife as a Prize as a woman who drives her fate forwards. And scaringly, these two balance each other, the woman as a negative lead, and actually quite a few stories that appear here, appear here as well. So you have stories where there are kind of female fighting against women fighting against women. And this, well, many of you, as I saw in the chat, are really concerned with this situation, because it is a situation which we have to deal with. And the last question on the questionnaire, do I find stories that I can identify myself with? So there's no wonder that some of us will struggle in finding traditional classical tales in the normal catalogs, because in fact there is an imbalance. So what do we do with this imbalance? How do we deal with it? And that is what we're going to look at next. This is sort of our reality. As for the collected tales, and now we will look into sort of a broader picture of this, what this has to do with us as storytellers, and at the end we'll be looking at strategies. But maybe before we go to the next step, we can see if there are any questions to this, if this to either the columns or my research.
No question in chat for now. There are surely comments, of course, depending from tradition to tradition. These ciphers can change, but most of all here, I see that people recognize this as a problem and they praise your work. So is there any question to Ragnhild? Oh, our story on the chart from European folklore only or worldwide?
This chart is European, because the book I used is only European tales. So this will change once you look in a broader, you open up, which might be interesting if you think of, well, I mean, that's a whole different research to look whether Eurocentric stories, if they are more biased to the normal view on gender and binary situation, or if it's the same in other traditions. So that would be a whole other research.
Yeah, this can definitely be done. They're asking, what is the name of the tale where you find the gay motive?
It is, it's the girl in a man's clothes. That's the tale, that's the name of the tale that I've, that one of them that I know of this type, but the AT number or the ATU number is 514. And it's in German, it's called Geschlechterwechsel, and in English, it should be sex change. I sent it to, oh, sorry, I sent this.
You sent it just to me, yes.
A little private conversation with Mattia. But I can put this out. I can send it to Fest, or that wouldn't be a problem at all. The only thing I need to say, this is a sort of, well, it's actually the 5th draft or something. So this is not perfect yet. I'm working at it, and I will. What I can do, I can also write down my criteria for why I placed stories where I placed them, and then you might find the odd one who slipped in somewhere where it shouldn't be. And also, I did not look into all the variants that he gives. There might be in the variants, there might be totally different motifs with more female leads. I don't know. But that is, yeah. Yes.
Could you also give us the title of the book you used for this research?
Yeah, it's, I will write it, the German one, because I don't think it is translated. Now I sent it to someone else. Who did I send it to now? I sent it to Jay. Hello, Jay. I don't know why I did that. I sent it to.
You can change to everyone there.
I've changed. I like private conversations, obviously.
You have so many. You're really multitasking this evening.
So, yes, I will share this. And I need to say one thing, though. This, in his foreword, he says that his starting point was the first classification by Antti Arne, the Finnish guy, probably because he did that in German. So there might be differences between the ATU system and his system. So just be warned, there's a lot to do. But with all these buts, I'm happy to send it out. Don't sell it. So if there are no more questions, I would hand over to our next speaker. Is that okay?
Yes, I think it's very well okay.
Great. Now, the big advantage of teaching in a further education department at a university is that I have a lot of students who know a lot more than I do in a lot of fields. So they bring in gems of knowledge. And one of these students, who I can't call a student anymore because she's long gone out, she's now a young storyteller, a rising star on the German storytelling scene. And she's been in the FEST program for young storytellers in Portugal. She has done research, both her BA and her MA has been on stereotypes, one in direction of racism and white privilege, one in the direction of stereotypes on stage, and to, now I tried to translate this in my head before this meeting and it's gone, is how you can be in charge, sort of work against stereotypes on stage, in art, in theatre, and become the subject rather than the object. I hope this was sort of correct. So Annika, I would just pass this on to you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this very kind introduction. I'm really I'm blushing. You can't see because the light is so bright. Yeah, so the last input for today, before we go more broader into discussion, was that we thought to give a bit more like philosophical or theoretical input, why we think it's important to talk about all of this, to talk about representation, stereotypes, and identity positions, what it has to do with political responsibility of storytellers and so on. So I will give a short input where I will explore that question from a cultural studies point of view, on connected to thinkers such as Stuart Hall and Jacques Derrida. Maybe some of you know their names, have heard of them. They have written a lot about the relation between culture and cultural performance and subject and the power of discourse. So actually it has, I feel like, a lot to do with storytelling. There's one book of Stuart Hall which I reread in preparation for this, not the whole book, but some chapters. I put it in the chat if you want to check it out. His work is mainly based on the question of racism and the binary category between white and black, but you can easily transfer it to these other categories which we already started to explore here. Because like what he explains, or what the basis is, like we saw in the Gender-Bred Person, there are different categories which we use to understand gender, sex, sexuality, and generally how our society works together. And these categories, so we had the question of gender expression, sexual orientation or romantic orientation, sex. There's also obviously white and POC, there is disabled and abled. There's a lot of like binary categories. There's always two poles, you're either or you're or. And so there's one quote, one reference to Emily Durkheim and Levi Strauss. They're like anthropologists who say like it's completely normal that in a culture we, and as human beings, we classify things and we make categories to understand the world around us and to make meaning. And that you differentiate between two categories, because otherwise it's all a blurry mess and we don't know where we are anymore and who we're talking to and what we're actually saying and so on. So that you need categories to understand, to create meaning. And this is the basis of every culture. And these categories which we use to understand are different from culture to culture. So for example, when we look at the binary, the binary gender category, which Gaia made up with like woman and man, we now learned that there is actually people who define themselves, who position themselves outside of this binary, but also in other cultures, and especially in pre-colonial cultures, you have cultures where it's completely normal to have 3 genders or to have 5. And there I, just as a side note, because I find it so cool and super interesting, there's a link to a map where you can see all these different kind of cultural uptakes on gender and gender categories. Okay, so Durkheim and Levi Strauss say we need these categories to make sense of the world. They define our culture and they're reproduced by the culture we do at the same time. So we could say, no problem, there's A and there's B. They're different but equal and everyone lives happily ever after. But drumroll, Derrida comes in and Derrida analyzes and says like, well, actually, and most of you won't be surprised about this, if you have 2 binary categories, there's always a hierarchy. There's always a central category that is the norm, has dominance, and there is the other, there's the other category. So there's a power relation between the two. And here's a nice quote from Derrida. Ta-ta. So he says, we're not dealing with a peaceful coexistence, but rather, this is a but, not a hut, but rather with a violent hierarchy. One of the 2 terms governs the other or has the upper hand. And the one important note is that if we're talking about violence here or about power, it's not necessarily meaning like physical violence or force, but it can also mean a kind of power that is seducing, that is through discourse, that is really attractive, so kind of soft power. And what follows out of this hierarchy is that the position, the identity category which is dominating, has the power to define. It is defined as the norm. And the descendant, the other one, is descendant from the norm and is the other. So one is empowered to say what is normal and what is not. And we have this, for example, I feel it's very obvious and evident with heterosexuality and this cisgender, that it's considered as normal. And the other one is kind of like abnormal and queer. Queer is even, the meaning of queer is strange, abnormal, no? It makes it very clear. And also in the binary categories of man and woman, it changed over time. Now it's maybe both seen as normal positions, but historically the norm was to be a man. To be a man was to be human, and women were kind of queer creatures, also queer creatures in a way, like weird creatures. So we've come a long way. And besides the symbolic power, though, there's also what then Gramsci and Hall and all of them call cultural hegemony, which means that this position, this identity position, is positioned as leadership with regards to a lot of different social spheres. So it's not only like, it's cool to be white, but being white also comes with more access to economic power, more representation in governance, and so on. So access to institutions. So for example, yeah, so we see that there's all these, this is the structural then outcome, or how this is connected to structure. It's not only symbolic. And like I said, Hall analyzed this mechanism with regard to white and black, but we can also look at this with the identity category, man and woman, for example. Now, I already said like man was the norm and women, they really fought through the last centuries for being first recognized as human beings, then recognized as citizens, being able to vote, being able to be elected, as economic subjects, being allowed to make money. And we still see the continuations of this hegemony today in materialist questions, like in gender pay gap, in numbers of violence against women, representation in politics and institutions, and also in the discursive questions like what are the main roles in films, for example, or in storytelling, like we just saw in Ragnhild's analysis. How are women portrayed in advertisement and so on? And you also have this with the other identity categories like hetero and homo, cis and trans, where in the last decades, what has changed actually is not that the world suddenly changed, but that people under this identity have fought during the last decades to be recognized, to have rights, to have representation, and it's still lots to do. And of course, just as a side note, people are not usually don't have just one identity category, but a combination of them. So as you can imagine, if there is a homosexual woman, a lesbian woman that is also disabled and black, it's a combination of all of these material consequences that come with it, which is, if you have this perspective on reality, it's called intersectionality. Probably also a lot of you have heard of it. So what does it have to do with cultural production and with storytelling? One thing is, if we go back to these two poles of the binary, that the norm comes with who is the subject and who is the object. So the position who is in the center is normally the subject, who has agency, who we can identify with, who has facets, who is complex, etc. And the descendant, the other, or what is made the other, is only described by the subject, has a is made an object, is objectified. And we also see this in the analysis Ragnhild made, that there's a big unbalance between male and female leads. So we see who is normally the subject in the story, who is normally in the position we identify with, who is the object, and who is made the object. That is more simplistic. And even more concrete, who is the prize, so literally the object for the male figure to win. And what it has to do with storytelling is that obviously we all base our storytelling, not all of us, it was mentioned, someone from my break room mentioned before, it's also here people who don't just use traditional stories probably, but also different kind of storytelling. But if we look at the traditional stories, obviously that's like a cultural canon that we use, that we base our stories on. So we show the culture, we're mirroring the culture, but also when we create our own stories, we probably base it on the culture we live in. But we don't only mirror the culture that is our background, but we also reproduce it, we manifest it through telling stories. Obviously, we put out images in the world, words, narratives, that then again, by repeating it, manifest and produce the culture anew. So if I repeat the same image again and again, and the way I talk about certain identities again and again, what happens is that it legitimizes the hierarchy, and it normalizes it, and it even naturalizes it. That it feels like, this is nature. It's just how it is, and nothing can be done about it. And I think, especially in storytelling, this is important because we play so much with imagination. We create images with our words. So what we tell creates what can be imagined, and with what I can identify and what I can find normal. And that's also how I see myself in society, how I engage with others, and so on. So, of course, culture and cultural performance and storytelling is not the only force that defines the society we live in and the hierarchy and the structures, but it does play a role in it if we follow this line of reasoning. And at the end, so a last quote, Dwight Conkergood said he was an ethnographer who really looked at performances and cultural performances. And he said, we should look at all the cultural performances that are there, and I would say then include storytelling, to what extent they reproduce, enable, and naturalize ideology, or how they subvert, criticize, and challenge it. And I feel like from the discussion from everyone here, like probably we're all on the same page with this. And so the next step we want to do is to talk about, so how can we do this? Like what are the strategies to do that? What are possibilities to subvert or to criticize or to challenge? But before we go into that discussion, are there any questions about this?
For what I see from the chat, there are not so many questions as praise for your work and what you said. Of course, this is sparking the request to start building a list of stories that can represent the other genders, the other sexuality, all of these unrepresented categories. Martina,
Martina has a question. I saw her also raising. Or I thought she was waving at me, but she has a question.
But the question is a question I'm asking myself, but I want to share it. It's pretty clear that the folk tales, especially the European ones, have been told and are probably coming from an age of patriarchy and heteronormativity. So my question is, should we jump behind them and go straight to myth and to the stories coming from other cultures that didn't have this strong period of civilization, as we call it, on a European point of view? Or should we try to change them and adapt them to be also gender better? Or just should we invent new material? Because this material, as it is traditional, and it's what's called the Spiegelung. It's a reflection of that time and society. Of course, we also have to keep digging for the few gems that survive these times, because there are a few stories with homosexual love or other kinds of loves, but they are very hard to find, and they are not so many. So my question is, should we try and change them, or should we find something else?
Yeah, I feel like, can I reply to that? Or I feel like these are already two strategies, no? One is like, okay, just like don't tell them at all, or change them. And then I think the question is to what extent, and the third one we're already doing is like research more and look for the hidden stories where we have other images. And if we talk about changing, then there's a discussion of like, how can you change stories? There's also, we had this in our breaking room, the question of this like purity of the old stories, and you shouldn't be changing them. Yeah. And maybe there are also other strategies. Writing new one, also someone wrote down like, let's just write all new stories.
If I can come from here, also relating to something that was written in chat, what we choose to tell is powerful, and we telling stories from a specific perspective, we reinforce that culture, and eventually we reinforce the patriarchy. So, of course, this is the next step we are going to take in this discussion. And first of all, I like to say I'm a little bit sorry, because we are going over time relating to what we thought at the beginning. But if it's too late for you, feel free to leave. The point I think we are now approaching in this discussion this evening is, are there strategies so that we can try to tell these stories and approach these themes? How do we deal with stories in a way that can include this new perspective? And I'd like for the guests, for Annika and Ragnhild, to express their experience with that. There are strategies, they are not mutually exclusive, they don't exclude each other, they can be mixed. I think the best way to do is to explain how we in the past had dealt with the possibility, and eventually I'll tell one of my experience with that. So Annika, would you like to share your experience with dealing with this topic and a practical as a practical possibility?
I definitely also I have a lot of questions, and I'm often stuck because a lot of the stories I read in the collections, I'm like, oh no, and then there are few which I like I often, up to now, I mainly told stories with a female lead, but they're really hard to find nice and good ones, which I actually find subversive also. But then I feel like something really small that often for me changes something when I listen is in this moments of, you have a male lead and it's a great story, and then you have a moment, for example, where it's about the wedding, and just a small thing of like, and the king looked to his daughter and she was like, yeah, I like him. And then it already, you know, she agrees to marry. And then it already changes at least a little bit the dynamic. It gives her a bit of agency, you know, and one can decide how big and how small one makes it, but to just make it a bit more like she also has a say. And this is just in the male female positions. So with for kids, I have told them there were two kings, they wanted a baby, they couldn't get pregnant, then came a fairy, and suddenly they were pregnant. And then my housemate, she's 4, she was like, wait, a king? Ah, yeah, sure, men can get pregnant. And it was it. It was a really nice moment. Yeah, but maybe other ideas. I want ideas.
I see a lot of ideas coming in the chat about adapting, not adapting, contextualizing, all kinds of this. I think there are many ideas. Maybe someone wants to say something about it.
Well, I would like to, if possible, I would like to catch up on one thing that was said, just as a comment, and then maybe follow up on that. This notion of, but these are the fairy tales and they're holy, and that was not the word that was used. I can't remember what was said, but we cannot touch them or we cannot change them. The problem is that the ones who wrote them down, they changed them already. There was a moment in which they fixed them, and they fixed them in the way they wanted them to be fixed. So actually someone interfered with the living material at a certain point. And just to give this example, I can't remember who I've discussed this with was the fact that the Grimm brothers, who, I mean, have such an important role to play in traditional tales, that they thought the fact that the mother was the bad one was too strong, so they changed it into the stepmother. So basically, we have this idea that the stepmother is the bad one, but actually, initially, it was the mother who was the bad one. So we're not discussing what that means or what that meant at that point, also for the female image. It's not about that. It's just about that there was someone who fixed it, and then it was fixed, and then it didn't change anymore. So if they hadn't been allowed to change, then they wouldn't have looked as they do today, if they would have been in an oral tradition, but they weren't. That's full stop. And yeah, maybe.
I'd like to add to that. There is, and for that I'll share the link of a video that I find it's very funny every time. If you have time later, save it now and look at it later. It's the story of Rapunzel, which is the gender swap version of Rapunzel, with this man with a long beard living in a tower, combing his beard, and eventually he will do the same thing Rapunzel did, but everything gender swap. And it made me think in many stories, if we actually think many folk tales, the characters are defined by their actions and what they do. And there, in many folk tales, the Grimm fairy tales, for example, you can gender swap all the characters, and the stories can go on as untouched, and they work because it's simply what they do. And we frame through society, through centuries, what we thought was the norm. That Cinderella, take an example, Cinderella, because she's working in the house, she has to be female. But if you swap it and you make it, there is this young lad with stepbrothers and a stepfather or a father that made him do all the work in the house, and then he meets this wizard that gives him the possibility to attend the princess ball. It still works. It perfectly works. So it's just how it was framed at the beginning, and we continue to frame it because it felt for us as the norm, but it's not necessary, not in this case. That was one example that can be done.
And I see Abi waving. I wave back, but I think you have a question.
It's not really a question. It's more a comment that comes from this last year work trying to understand these questions that are raised tonight. And I think it would be really interesting to have some inputs from, we worked a lot with Louis thinking about understanding actually what we call the corpus of tales. And it's clear that we are using words which are extremely imprecise, like folk tales and tales. It's not the same thing. And a lot of our understanding of storytelling is based on this ATU classification, European center focus from that does not represent nor us nor the world. But the work that has to be done to go further than that is a huge work. And that's very often what stops us from daring to be storytellers, which is to be traditional. In the traditional idea of the storyteller, you're adapting the content with the condition of the living. And that's what we are doing. That's what all the questions raised tonight are so interesting. It means the repertory of the storytellers is evolving, is changing, because the society is calling for new inputs. And perhaps a lot of this story has just to be forgotten. Instead of fighting with them, we can just drop them and believe in us as storytellers. In the last workshop we've been doing, I was amazed how young storytellers, once they don't dare to do the work, but if they are freed from us because we are older, say, do it, change things, then their ideas is superb. And the storytelling world would completely change if we could free ourselves from this bad understanding of what is traditional and orality or transmission, and to look at it on a much more alive, unexpected point of view. And I really wish we would continue this forum and introduce some inputs about the corpus and the understanding of what is actually not helping us.
Definitely. Thank you, Abi. Thank you a bit for the input and the feedback of all the work that has been done this year. You also talked about a little bit of the workshop that was done with the University of Berlin, and yeah, it is definitely a topic that I think shall be discussed about even more. I don't know, maybe we could do also a second issue of this topic where maybe we make more of an open question. I don't know how much we can go on and on this evening specifically. I'd like to ask once again Annika and Ragnhild if they have other feedbacks, something else, or if anyone else wants to add on this already.
Well, I could jump in and comment on. I think there are different paths that we can take when it comes to changing or adapting story. And you, Mattia, were talking about when you take a traditional tale and gender swap. What we need to remember, one of the things we need to remember, that some of them will work in the swap because we know the original tale. So there is a double layering. There is, it happens in the contrast of the knowing the tale and then having a change of the tale. So that's one thing. So the question is, can we adapt story where actually it's not obvious, that people don't get that it's the question of normalizing what is currently not normal. Is how do we communicate something that is that it seems normal. I'll give you an example. I've just this year experimented for the first time in my career with addressing white privilege in a story, in a autobiographical story. So the whole point of this story was to aim it at my process of understanding what it means to be white, which has been an absolute blind spot for me until recent years. And for me, it's so important to start looking at that, because that really changes, it has changed my perception of the world completely. So in this autobiographical tale, it had to do with a journey with my partner. So in German, if you say partner, you will instantly hear it's a woman. In English, it's not that clear, but when I go on telling the story, I can make two choices. I can either try and hide it and pretend she's not a woman so that people are not disturbed or think, oh, this is a gay coming out story, or this is whatever. Or I can try and tell it as normally as possible, just a holiday story where it's kind of part of the theme, but without being the focus. Do you see the difference? What kind of, I didn't want it to be about a gay relationship. I wanted it to be about white privilege. And I think working my way through it, and the way, it depends on how we then tell it. How normal can we tell it, or how little can it be part of the story that is just like, oops, did she say that? Oh yeah, she did. And then she's somewhere else. So I think there is something about also normalizing this situation, that that it becomes part of the repertoire. And my third thing is, it's of course not about not to tell heteronormative stories or not to tell strong male lead stories. There's something about finding a balance in between, so that the subject is not connected with one particular gender and one particular sexual identity, but that both is balanced. So I think that's probably my, full stop.
If I could add on that, it makes me think about this thing, normalizing, and the way this specific topic is put inside a story, how much we show and point at it. We can work with layers. These are all strategies, very valid. It makes me think about the way I worked on a story. This is a very common topic in story, not very common, but it's present in some traditional stories. The woman who dresses a man to become a knight, and the prince fall in love with this knight before knowing it's a woman. It's actually a woman. In this story, the prince suspects this knight is actually a woman, and for the whole story tries to discover if this is really a woman, because he is in love. It's impossible for him to be in love with a male. On the surface, it seems to deal with the gender identity or the gender expression of this princess dressing as a knight. There can be much to explore there about expression and identity eventually, but from my point of view, one of the interesting point was at a certain point, the prince tries to trick this other person to reveal his biological sex at the point that the princess has to go away, and he is left alone. And this experience, the fact to be left alone, destroys him. And he is so disappointed. He goes back to the castle and everything feels empty. And he eventually goes in the room, in the guest room where that prince was sleeping the night before. And he just can help but think about this prince. And was it a man? Was it a woman? Who cares? And that is what I added. It's not specifically in the story. I had the thoughts. This prince, who cares? He was in love. And so I like the idea of putting this element about this man that realize it's not important what gender, what sex this other person is, as long as I'm in love. And this is a story about discovery. The prince was bisexual all along and he never knew. And this is just a small moment that hidden in a story that since the beginning seemed a story about gender identity or gender expression, and it is also a story about a man discovering he is bisexual or maybe pansexual. It depends how we want to see it, and that slips through at the end just for 1 second. So it was one of my experience with such a topic. I don't know, are there other people who would like to give some feedbacks on this, their own experience? Jonah.
Oh, I think everybody has things to say. I feel like we're all ready to talk all night about this. It's clearly touched something. But like, as you were saying, stories aren't a thing. They're not fixed. They're not a solid entity. They are a moment. Stories are a moment. And I think stories have the capacity to be all of these things all of the time. And in fact, if we start to challenge stories and we start to explore with them, in a funny way, it makes the traditional stories even stronger, because we need that like a reference point, the traditional reference point, so we can go back to it, so we can reflect, so we can take from it and change it and do what we want with it. So we have the capacity to be all of these things. There's nothing that's fixed. We don't have to decide anything. The potential happens when we start telling, and it will open up as we tell.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know, Ragnar and Annika, I don't know if you want to add something on that. If not, if there is nothing else, I'd like to.
Okay, final note, because I also have to go. Just that I was really, Ragnar invited me and I was super curious about, because I've never been to a FEST conference, not like this. So I'm really optimistic about, I mean, it's a long, like it's a challenging way, and it's really a lot to do and to untangle and to explore, but I think it's also a lot of fun. And with so many great people and great minds, it's going to be really nice to continue this travel, this journey together. So thank you all.
Thank you, Annika. I really like the image of the journey, because when we talk about the journey, we not always think about a destination. We think about how we move day by day. And I think this whole topic is a journey of discovery, understanding of oneself, first of all, and of this story. It's a deal between oneself, our position, oneself position in the world, the story, and little by little, with modesty and humility, approaching all of this, we can do something more. We can create the new paradigm. And I'd like to add one last experience of mine related about perspective, and explain we don't always have all the perspective. I was in the situation where, after telling a story who dealt with this kind of topic, a member of the audience came to me and said, "You offended me when you said that." And this was for me a traumatizing experience, because of course I didn't want to offend anyone. And I was, the first instinct I was going on the defensive. Oh, no, I didn't want to, but I stopped for a second, and I was in a very lucky position, because the person who came to me was a friend of mine. So I had the possibility on a neutral ground to stop and say, okay, I'm sorry if what I said is offended you. I'm very sorry. This is what my perception of the theme was. And I tried to bring it on as best as I could. I didn't consider your perspective. Please tell me more. And eventually, I hope I'll be able to bring this perspective also in the story, so that I won't offend anymore someone who had your experience. And I think we have also to remember all the perspective, all the experiences are valid. We have to consider them. We don't know all of them. We must be humble in accepting them, and maybe we are not able to fit all of them. But be conscious that they exist, and being conscious that there are people that can bring them. So always listen to the people, always try to get a new perspective on that. And if there is nothing else, there is Ragnhild, you want to?
I would just, because I saw someone asking about this, my little private research, my personal research. I will put on the document what I was looking for, but remember that I was using a German text, so the English text might frame it differently. So when I was looking for verbs and looking for specific cues, they might not be in the English one. So don't have a lecture on this in some sort of university, because you might get in trouble. So, but feel free to use it, and maybe if we can manage to actually, because this is based on the old one and not the ATU one, if we all sort of, maybe we should make a joint document where everybody can put in their discoveries based on a certain category, sort of keyword, then we can extend this and make it more than 189 tail types. So, thanks.
So I just declare this as the famous last words. And
yes.
I see everyone in the, because I want to go home. Oh, I'm already home. But no, but I see in the chat almost everybody saying, hey, we have to discuss this further. At a certain moment, there was also something about the nationalistic aspect of some of the folk tales, etc. I think there we could also have a further discussion. So I think this was the first step in a discussion, maybe a very important step, because we should all be aware of all these things in the choices we make. But there is also a variety of dealing with it. And I think if something was made clear, thanks to all of you, Mattia, Ragnhild, Annika, Gaia, are you still here? I don't know.
She had to go.
Oh, she had to go. One thing what is clear, I mean, you really led us around all these topics, around all these approaches, and I think this we need more. We need more of this. So thank you very much. In 2 weeks there will be another Fest forum, and I have no clue what we're doing then. So Kathy, help me.
We are inviting a group of storytellers who is specifically working around digital storytelling, and they really want to raise the technical aspect of doing it. So practical examples, but also time to ask questions, and on how to record, what materials to use, what sorts of editing tools are there in the world, all sorts of really practical things.
So it's really practical and very technical one. So for the technical minds in this group, I see you in 2 weeks. Everybody who already was in trouble today with all the things, okay, skip one and join us in the one after that. Now, I hope to see you in 2 weeks. Thank you all for coming. Have a great night, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.